I've broken my thinking today into 4 different parts. They are rather standalone in their thinking, but I think it befits sort of the path that I've taken. So I'm going to I'm going to talk for a second at the end about strategic communications, which is obviously where I landed, and communications and the broad choices you have in communications. I also want to talk for a minute about small business ownership and what that's like and how I fell into it and the decisions I made around it. I want to talk a little bit about how to penetrate the marketplace and how to get into something, particularly for those of us who did not graduate in an area that had a really defined career choice. It was abroad. So I want to talk about that. But I was backing out of my topics there, so I'm going to spend a few minutes on the few topics. But I'm going to start with a topic that I'm passionate about and is a little probably one off the subject. And I want to talk to the women in the room, and I want to talk to the strong men in the room who support the women in the room. So I want to talk about women for a minute. I do a lot of leadership training with women, and we have some specific tendencies and goals in mind. So I distilled down. I'm going to just jump right in. This would normally be a 2-hour thing. We're going to cut to the ending and go to the helpful hints section. And I want to talk about 6 things particularly to women who want to be an influence in the rooms that they're in. Now, to be honest, and being a little personalized to it, I think that they're obviously universal traits, and clearly women and men are using them, but I want to speak specifically to the women. First and foremost, what is the most important thing to do is introduce yourself and take up space. It sounds really elementary, but women are often over courteous or over aware of the circumstances, or I came in late, I don't want to bug anybody. Or we're aware of the people in the room who are bloviating and we don't want to listen to them, so we're we don't want to be that guy. But I will say, please, women, always introduce yourself, always take up that space. Take a seat at the table, literally and figuratively. Get there. This is great advice for early career moves, too. Don't defer. So don't be, a jerk, but take that seat. You deserve it. You're first telling people your value by how much space you take up in the room. And nonverbal, I'm going to slide into communications talk for a minute. Whenever we do a lot of work with leaders who are learning how to publicly speak. And what we remind us all is that, remember, when we talk to each other, 70 to 75% of what we hear from the person is nonverbal, right? It's not the content. It's what was it like to experience to be with them? What was their nonverbal? So I'm going to keep shouting out to women here. Women in the room, remember, this literally space, literally the energy you're putting out there indicates whether you should be taken seriously or not, whether you know your subject matter. So watch your nonverbal. Don't shrink into yourself. Feel free to move your papers out so they're comfortable. Just the little things. I had a guy tell me this once, and I thought, oh, that's so clever. So I'm going to say this to everybody. Women often assess in a work environment their value by what they deliver, packages. And men assess often their value by who they are. They are I have an opinion, I'm going to give it to you. I have experience, I have wisdom. Women also often feel like they need to deliver something. Both are important, right? They're on a spectrum. When you don't do one and you don't do the other, it doesn't work. Women often, though, don't do the, I'm good, I'm here, I'm the value. It's not that I did this really cool Gantt chart. It's not that I can do a pivot table. It's not that I can deliver your stuff really quick. It's not that every time you ask for something, I produce it. Now, if you don't produce it all, there's a deficit, but also remember to just value who and what you're bringing and not just the work you're bringing. For women, I say, don't sweat the semantics. Don't worry if people think you're bossy. Don't worry if people think that that's not what you should do. Don't worry when you get pushback, because you will get pushback. And the men can attest to the fact that they get it too. They'll just push through it. So don't worry about what people say. Really trust yourself. Check in with yourself about were you appropriate and were you doing the right thing, but don't worry about the semantics. In a work environment, strength can be collaborative. Don't separate how you do work from how work should be done. If you think it's collaboration, if you think it's getting everybody else on board, if you want to change the structure in your work environment, do it. Push through that. Strength and good management skills do not need to be defined by gender roles. And then finally, often as women, we're seeking permission. We're waiting to be asked to do something. We are waiting to be told it's okay. And we need to get over that. We need to lean into leadership roles. We need to ask for things. We need to assert ourselves. So, first phase of what I wanted to talk today were just unique, really practical characteristics that I want to say specifically. Again, I think they apply to everybody. But I really think it's important that the women in the room who are entering the marketplace or entering any room, whether that is a schoolroom, whether that's a classroom, whether that's a boardroom, whether that's an interview, really think about the messages you're sending about yourself and how you're valuing yourself. And more importantly, value yourself. Take up that space. Really feel that confidence level. It's an incredibly big indicator, particularly about whether you're hired or not. We interview a lot of people. And remarkably so, women are giving me lower price points for their work than men are, consistently. We just did a round of interviews about 2 months ago. So good for the guys. Push those points. Trust yourself. Really trust your own value and lean into that. So we'll talk a little bit more about my perceptions of what you should emphasize when you're entering the marketplace. I'm just going to wrap that part up. Thank you for giving me a minute to speak particularly to the women in the room and the women in the marketplace to say, now is the time, but it's a little different dimension sometimes for women. They have to be a little more aware, in my opinion, of how to be of influence. Not just how to be competent and how to be relied on. Those are things we tend to be comfortable with. But to move to those influential levels, to move to the point where we are in charge and we are being held accountable and taken seriously requires, I think, some conscientiousness. Okay, that's my first topic. I like little mini topics, because I'm that person. So my second one that I wanted to talk about is what you probably hear from a few of your speakers, which is, what do you do when you graduate with something? And you kind of know what you like, but you didn't graduate in an accounting and therefore you were becoming an accountant and it all makes sense to you and all sounds good. My degrees are in behavioral psychology and political science. And the political science degrees were frankly just a byproduct of me going to a political science class. Like, I didn't think they were going to be useful, but I liked them. So I just went. And I thought I was going to be a therapist because everyone in my family is a therapist. And I did that for a couple of years. And I so don't have the temperament for it. I hated it. But I felt like I should because it seems like a noble thing, but I hated it. But what to do? Because, poli-sci wasn't a real degree. It's just what I liked. And I went, and I've been the director of a couple of nonprofits. But I look back at the people I work with, the employees, and I have had the Exoro Group, which we'll talk about in a minute, for 18 years. And I think to them, it feels like I'm perhaps reliable and, a hard worker and knew what I wanted to do. And in fact, that's not at all how I see my path. So I tried to break down, what do you do? What did I go through looking back? I knew what I liked, and I knew what I was good at, but in that kind of vague way. And then as we were talking before, Whitney and I were talking before, some of it is marketplace dependent, right? Like, I don't get to make all the choices, especially when I'm in a field like communications or PR or even political science or public policy. Those are really undefined roles. They also start to get into networking, right? And I feel like networking can be a huge barrier, but it can also be a really big asset. So I want to just break down some component thinking that I've done about that area, about, when you're taking the winding road. So First, the easy do what everyone tells us. Look to things that interest you. Now, if you can find your passion, like unequivocal passion, you should do that. My brain doesn't, like I know what I dislike and like, but I don't know that, I love my job. I am passionate. I have found my passion is advocacy, but I couldn't have told you that, right? Like I couldn't have told you that. I could tell you what I like to do though. I can tell you what energized me. I could tell you what my work ethic was. So in some ways, when you think about what you like and what's interesting to you, break it down from a how you want to spend your day point of view, like what your talents are about how you want to spend your day. Do you need other people around you? Can you work unguided? Do you like that? Do you not? One of the reasons that I'm telling you to think about that level of introspection is money in your job interview. Because all of us are saying the same things, right? Oh yeah, I'm gonna like this. Oh, my answer to that question is this. If you can sort of say, I'll tell you what I do well, and be willing to say, I'll game up on anything else. So I'm gonna take asides about now the marketplace, because I think the only reason you're doing this is to find where you wanna spend your time for your job and the compensation you wanna get. And I'll say for me, the key thing when I look at employees, and when we hire employees for other people, is that if you're new to the marketplace, don't sell experience. I think it's just like this common mistake where people come in and sell experience. And I'm like, here's all the things you don't have. You have that I don't have. You have the latest education. You are the most current on what the methods and means are. You have a fresh brain. You are energetic. You have a new point of view. You have passion. You have the ability to focus. You're willing to work really hard. I love all that. When someone fresh to the marketplace comes in and starts to tell me all the experience they've had, I'm like, dude, definitionally you don't have experience. So like, don't worry about it. Like, who cares? I could care. Experience is not a plus for, I mean, it is. It's super swell. But what's fascinating is who you are and like where you're coming from and what you're going to bring to the table. I will also tell you to not undersell if you are willing to work hard. So this is going to be an old person sounding old, but we just hired a guy who I didn't expect to hire. I had one position open. I ended up hiring two. There's no other reason I hired them because then this guy, unlike anyone has ever sold me in the history of being sold, he is going to work his tail off. I have a tendency to swear, so there's a pause before each, because I'm like, yeah, it's taped. So he just so persuaded me. Like, we'll just move to slogans. He is a can-do guy. He was just like, what do you need? I'll do it. I will do it. He has virtually no experience in this area. He's been in the marketplace for a while. He's been out of school for 6-7 years. And he's had some interesting jobs. They're not the jobs he's wanted, right? It's an experience a lot of us have. He had okay jobs. They were paying the bill jobs. And good stuff, but not in this area at all. Not what he wanted, not what he had studied, not what his passion area is. Our subject matter is a little bit of a reach for him. He does not have direct, even his degrees are a little one off. He persuaded me like very few have ever persuaded me that he'll do anything to make sure he's game for what we're game for. And in my line of work, critical thinking, an ability to learn, that's all I want. I want your brain to be engaged. I want you to be willing to problem solve. I want you to be willing to take a risk. I want you to be willing to be the guy that takes the blank piece of paper and writes the first draft. To jump in and take a risk and be willing. We'll be willing to do the work. I hear a lot of people who are like, yeah, I've got a lot of this, I've got a lot of this. They're kind of selling their value in this skill way. I just say, man, sell yourself. Be game for it. Be up for what they want. Agility in the marketplace is so much more interesting. You saying, I do not know how to do that, but I know how to Google and I can figure this out, or I will learn. That he was willing to say, I don't know how to do this, but I'll learn from you. And that confidence of being able to say, I'll learn. I can figure it out. I am smart enough to do it. I just haven't done it yet. So appealing, so appealing. So I think for those of you who are still discovering what you want to do, having that point of view, or maybe you know what you want to do, but it's in a big bucket, like me for communications, right? I knew what I wanted to do, but communications is a big bucket and a lot to sort through there. So if you're in that, first start your journey with figuring out what makes you happy from really a boring point of view. I will tell you a very not cool secret. Exoro exists because I am not one of those zenny independent consultants who works downstairs in their basement and can really set aside their time and focus. I need to have people hold me accountable to going to work every day. So I started a business so that I could have coworkers. So, because I don't work well independently, I need collaboration. And that was a compelling reason to have employees for me. So, that wasn't strategic. It was really about how I optimized how I worked. So, do the things, identify the talents you want to develop. Now, I want to talk for a second about networking and how you even get started someplace, right? Like you're like, okay, good, I've done this. And I'm checking out every job search engine I can find. But in a lot of soft fields, it's about an introduction. So how do you get to that point? Introductions, I think, are interesting because they're both easy and hard. And the hard part is you may be going outside your comfort zone. If you're staying in Utah, or if you're staying in the Intermountain West, or particularly actually if you're going to DC, you will be, I believe, very pleasantly surprised at how many strangers or barely acquaintances or near acquaintances will be thrilled to help you on your journey. And we just never ask them. We just don't ask people. We don't do that. It's a vulnerable position, or we just don't think to do it. So here are some ways that I would start finding out two things, either where you could get a job or where you can get experience, because they're almost the same thing. If you're in a nebulous field, again, I'll keep using mine, like communications or policy work, sometimes you're like, I don't even know if I'd like to do that. I don't know enough about it. So if you have the opportunity to gain experience, do it. So what are some experiences you can gain? Internships or any, that's a sort of very linear thing. But you can also ask to shadow people. I've asked if I can go hang out with somebody for the day. And I've asked for meetings where come prepared, but ask for meetings and say, can I just ask you 5, 6, 7 questions about what you do? And how, that really practical, what do you do? What should I, don't ask them how much they make, but ask how much this kind of job makes, right? So, and how long's the work, and how long did it take you to get there, and what do you like? You will very seldom find even high-level C-suite people who will not accommodate you or give you the time. Unless they're jerks, and then that's fine because you didn't want their advice. So you can do a lot. You can shadow people. You can interview people. You can take them to lunch. And be really upfront with what you want. You want to understand their world better. You want the experience. You want the opportunity. You want the advice. And it's such a smart move. Because by doing that, you've just built your network and you've strengthened your network. So you'd start with people you admire in your neighborhood. You may start with people you've seen on television, actually, and see if you can't get a hold of them. You might start with professors. You might start with your cousin. You might start with a parent's friend who's in the area. And ask them to give you more connections. And if you take away anything, ask them to introduce you to 2 other people. And just be that direct and say, here's what my goal is. Here's what I would like from you today. I don't need a job. I'm not asking you for things. I want to understand what you do, or I want to be in this world, this arena that you're in. But putting yourself out there, do not think you don't have connections. Do not think you don't know the right people. You just have to start. You got to start the conversation with anybody. Ask them to sit down for a Coke with you for 15 minutes. And have 2 or 3 questions ready. And then at the end say, I need to connect. Here's where I think I want to go. I want to do something with communications, but I need to figure out where more. Can I spend a day at your firm? Can I spend a half a day with you? Can I take you to lunch? most of the people that you admire or have these really interesting jobs, I believe without exception, they will sit down with you. Exoro has the super luxury to work with a huge diverse audience, and almost every client we have is a leader of some kind, which is so fun to work with. We work with really amazing people doing the biggest of things. And I have found a correlation between those people and their willingness to build the world around them, because I think that's how they got there. They were sort of natural networkers. So network into it, and don't worry that you're like, I don't know anybody. Start with your professors. Start with your neighbors. Cold call people you don't know, call for friends and family. But one thing I would ask that when you do this, don't waste their time. So here's how you're not going to waste their time. Be prepared for the conversation. Have 2 or 3 questions that they can answer. So they're not responsible for the mental energy of the meeting. Like, it's flattering to be asked for advice. If you kind of just come and you're duding it up a little and you're like, dude, I don't know what I want to do. Can you help me with that? I'm like, no, this is now all my mental energy. Like, you need to give me I'll just answer your questions. I'll tell you anything you want to know, but you come with that mental energy. So have 2 or 3 questions. And when you think of good questions, don't think of being smart. Think of being authentic. Think of being like, legit, what do you want to know? Like, not the fluffy, like maybe it's theoretical, but like say, I don't know, how much time does it take to get there? Or how possible is this? What do you do? The other thing that I will tell you to use is a generic tool of really effective communication about yourself. And you should do this in an interview, and you should do this like when you're casually talking to people. Now I'm in the area of networking still. Always come with 3 things in mind. Have 3 things, and I'm going to relate this now to an interview because it applies the best. When I'm prepping people for interviews, and they were like, how do I anticipate all the questions and things? I say this to every speaker we work with, 3 things. Have 3 message points. 3 solid message points. Your best of your best. What is it you want to not leave that conversation without them knowing about you? Now, the nice thing about having this in your back pocket and having a couple of versions of that is that when they ask you something and you're stuck, pivot to one of the 3 things you wanted to tell them, right? And because repetition's awesome. Like, repetition is it's remarkable how many times we have to hear things before we even knew we heard them. So just switch up the style of the sentence a little bit, use a different adjective, but pick the 3 things you want someone to know about you or understand about your goals. So maybe they're personal, but maybe they're about your job goal. But I'll make it personal because it's easier. So 3 things I want, whether it's a personality trait, whether it's experience that I have, whether it's something I'm bringing to the table, whether that's where I want to end up in life. And make sure it gives you something to talk about the whole time. It gives your mind focus and direction, and you're not just passive to the conversation. And when people ask you things, 1, it may just be an answer you have, clearly, and then at which case you give that answer. But if you're like, I don't quite know how to answer this, answer to your strength. Answer to the 3 things you wanted them to know about you. Because when you leave, that person will have experienced you the way you wanted them to experience you. So you leave that interview and say, get it or not, man, I got my point across. I knew who I was. I knew what I could bring to the table. I knew what they would get from me. So I would say, as you prep for using people's time, kind of think through the messages, if you will. So this would be called messaging for us, right? What are the 3 biggest messages I want to deliver to this person? What do I want them to know? And then, I said this before, but interview people in the areas you're interested. It's remarkable how much people will share with you. And really look for experiences. Again, I'm speaking specifically to those who are in more esoteric fields or fields that have a lot of choices. I'll move to a second to strategic communications, and then I'll maybe end with owning a business. But in strategic communications, I mean, you could be a public information officer at a large institution. You could be in PR. You could be in management or government relations or campaigns. I mean, there's so much to do. I don't know how you sort through what you want to do. And by doing it is how you do it. And we have interns. We do a lot of internships. And we have interns who come and love it, and it doesn't make sense to them, and they say, that was really fun, but I just hated it. So here's where we would differentiate ourselves from people. We're in public policy. So we're not political consultants. I would sort of object to that terminology, but we are. I mean, we do public policy only. We only do hearts and minds issues. We do campaigns. We prep for bonds. We prep for legislative sessions. We work a lot with commercial sector and corporations, and it's anyone who's heavily regulated and needs to have a public conversation. So we're sitting next to each other on the airplane. I say, oh, I'm in PR and communications, and we get back at it because my husband likes to talk on planes and I don't. So then at that point, I'm like, here's my book. But when you drill down deeper, like, we're very niched. In fact, when we created the Exoro Group, there was not a firm like this in the Intermountain West, and we weren't sure if we would survive. And I know nothing. Like, whenever anyone says I'm in marketing, or even now, when people are like, oh, you're in communications, right? And you've done such a good job. And I'm thinking, I'm such a poser because I don't know any. I mean, I do now. I should own. I have learned. But like, I graduated in behavioral psychology and political science. Although, let's point out the obvious. If you want to work with politicians, you should get a degree in behavioral psychology, and that will be the most applied degree you'll ever have. But we do hearts and minds things, and we have a very niche, narrow audience, and it's talking to the public about changing their opinions or adding to their opinions. And it's talking to stakeholders about changing their minds or changing their opinions. So I point that out because you guys know better than me, and it feels more true now. There are so many different things to do and so many ways to enhance your career and change the jobs that you work at. And the reason I'm bringing that up is, what a great time to be in the market. You don't have, if your journey is to commit to a 30-year career that has a really direct point of view, then I say do that. Like, that's terrific. But I also love that you don't have to make that commitment, and you can keep excelling in your career environment, and you can keep doing remarkable things in your career environment, even though you're moving. And for me, the common thread is talent building. Do I continue to advance my skill set? Do I continue to be able to hone what I'm doing? I focus much more on my talents than the jobs that I had. Particularly, creating my own consulting firm has allowed me to appear stable, even though what we do is change topics all the time, right? I found out about myself that I loved advocacy and I loved the public policy process, but I couldn't imagine doing a single issue for 20 years. Like, I'm not built for that. So the firm allows me to change topics all the time. We have to continue to learn new issues, but I can grow and develop my skill set. So again, if you're one of those that want to try several things and you want to keep exploring, what I would keep writing down is the skill set you're building and the skill set you want to build. And that allows you in your next job interview to show that continuity and to show that through line and to show that skill development, even though you're like, yeah, I did this for a while. I did a lot of project work early on, so if you'd looked at my resume looked like I did this for 2 years, I did this for 18 months, and I was like, no, the job went away. Like, I kept doing project work, but I was able to articulate the experience I was gaining and the skills that I had, if that makes sense. I want to talk for just a second about so middle section, top it, networking, and trying to discover what you want to do, how to get a better sense of short-term experiences that help guide you to maybe where your passion is. So starting a small business, I'm just going to give some thinking about it because I think a lot of us do it now, and I think in this new marketplace it is possible to look at yourself to be a sole proprietor or to start your own business. And one of the things that I care most about in having my own business is theoretically I have control, right? Now it's theoretical but it still mentally for me works. So mentally I have this feeling that I ultimately have no boss, right? I own my own business. The reality is I just have a lot of bosses in my clients. But for me, there was this nice at the end of the day though, I don't really have a boss. So it's a mental thing. So small business ownership is good for those of us who maybe are I'm in control of my own self. The one challenge with small business ownership, particularly if you're successful, is you might feel trapped to some degree too, right? I mean, what if you want to move on and you have employees? And how do you balance that? How do you bring on and take that responsibility? Small business ownership is stressful, particularly if you have employees, and particularly if you're not a huge fan of the business side of it, the doing the QuickBooks and filing the taxes, because those all go along with it. But it's also incredibly empowering because you can keep creating your own journey along the way. So the one thing I would say is a great reason to start your own business or to join with some friends in a consultancy or to consider a new project is that you get to create the environment that makes you excel. And I think that's enormously appealing. So if you're having a hard time finding a job, or if none of the work in an institution is appealing to you, it's an interesting idea to start your own business, maybe alone or with some friends. And that process you go through of articulating to yourself why you want to start an own business is the same reason you're going to pitch to your clients that you are better than the large companies that they're working with. Because you must be, in your mind, creating a business environment that you want, you're not finding out there. I didn't find that environment that I wanted, so I created the consultancy that I wanted to see. And I had some experience in that area. I had hired a great deal of consultants like me, as I had done businesses for institutions. And so I knew what I wanted out of a consultant, and that was the environment that we created. I saw a gap between the consultants I was hiring and who I wanted to be, and that's how I focused my consultancy. My last bit of random thinking is I think it's very important to assess the skills that you have, not the skills of the person you want to be. And sometimes the skills you have are different than how you perceive yourself. So I'm going to use an example. I've had an employee he's terrific. He's really good. And the story ends with me helping him get another job. So he's really good, but he wanted to be, on our team we have a lot of strategists and we have some implementers. And the implementers are just really solid project managers, and they just keep those trains on the tracks. And they're really good at systems and protocols. They don't tend to be as good at the strategic part. They don't tend to be as good at the non-linear part, putting together plans, esoteric thinking, creative thinking. And he continued to see himself as a strategist. And we'd have these conversations, and he was bad. He wasn't very good at it. But it's who he wanted to be. In the room, in the marketplace, it was just really who he wanted to be. And I should say he was bad at it for professionals. He wasn't horrible at it, but in the level we were operating, he just was not very good at it. And he continued to fail, and it was really frustrating because he was really good at this other stuff, really good. But in his mind, he had decided that for whatever reason, he liked these labels more than he liked those labels. My clients valued them equally. I valued them equally. And there was a lot of feedback and a lot of feedback and a lot of feedback, and he would not accept that he wasn't good at these things. And I think a lot of us do this to some degree or another, is that we maybe think of ourselves one way, but for whatever reason, we're not thriving in that area. It's maybe who we want to be, it's maybe who we think about it, but if we can just switch these labels that we hold for ourselves a lot, and just switch the way we think about ourselves, it is so much more rewarding to do really good work than it is to be labeled the way you want to label yourselves. And he couldn't get over, and I mentioned strategist over manager, because even the words, right? I was thinking of a better word, because manager does sound a little more boring than strategist. But in my business, the managers, the ones that can execute on the ideas, are the difference between us winning a campaign and losing a campaign. I got a million guys who can give me their 2 bits. I have very few who can execute it at the level we need to get a win. And so in some ways I was valuing him, but he just wanted to be a strategist. So I think we also need to make sure we're really deep job satisfaction, really feeling like you accomplished something, really feeling good about yourself is also being pretty honest about what you're good at it and what the labels are and where you fit into organizations, and not worrying so much about job titles or worry about compensation, feel good about your compensation, but really digging deep about the skill set that you really have is important. Exoro runs off of 4 principles. The 4 principles that matter most to me are: be the very best at what you do, which I believe is a mindset, not an execution level. Like, we finish everything and it's like, that was really good, how could we have done better? So this approach that says, man, be the best. Really, there are so many people who don't want to be the best. Be the person who wants to be the best. Second, details matter. By details matter, I mean that it really does matter that you're paying attention to stuff, that you are engaged, that you are watching, you're anticipating, you are really like active listening, you're engaged in stuff. That is really important. Third, for us, do something that makes a difference. We're in public policy. It really matters to me that it makes a difference. It doesn't matter to me that anyone knows about it, you know? I mean, it doesn't matter to me that we have a high profile. It just matters to me that we made a difference. And then fourth for us is character counts. So it may not apply everywhere, but when you're in politics, it's pretty good to want to have character related to what you do. So those were, I know, you know, as I was thinking about this, I'm like, of course I can't, my path isn't linear, but I wanted to cover those 4 ways that I think about things and how I would get started in finding what my passion was and where labels would fit in for me and where my skill set would fit in for me. So that's my thinking for today.
You graduated in what?
Psychology and political science. And international relations, if you'd like to throw in another degree I don't use. The company I work for is called the Exoro Group. EXORO. Exoro means to prevail through persuasion. The partner I set up the firm with picked the name. Pardon? EXORO. Yeah, it's a Latin word. I didn't love the name at first. I had to commit to not saying Exoro when we first started. Because doesn't it sound like I should do like energy refining or something, or right? Shouldn't we be some kind of .com? You never really understand what people do. I've gotten used to it. I didn't pick the name, but yes.
Talk about how you pick a client, and more importantly, how you deselect a client.
How I deselect a client?
Why you wouldn't choose a client.
We've always had veto power. So we're a bipartisan firm, and we do some candidate elections. We don't do a ton of them because of that. We work on policy choices. So we've always had a choice. If people were like morally opposed to it, they could take a pass. If they weren't, though, one of the best things to do is to work on an issue that you don't believe in. Because it really, I mean, by not believe in, I don't mean like, again, deeply held, but more like, meh, I don't know about. We don't do clients who don't understand how to use consultants. That's one way to get off our list, and that took me years of experience. Lots of people don't understand how to use consultants. They think that they look at full-time equivalent employees and think that that's how they gauge what you do. Because I should say, I'm a consultancy where you hire us to augment what you're doing. So if you don't know how to use a consultant, you're not a good fit for us. Here's where you are a good fit. If you have a huge problem and don't know how to get out of it, if you are in crisis, if you know where you need to go but you don't know the path, if you are high functioning but lost in your world, we're great for you. We're really good for people who are like super high functioning but have a problem and they don't know how to start mapping where they are going. So you see corporation heads and you see, or we often represent the government and we often represent the corporation or the nonprofit petitioning the government. People who are having a publicly facing problem, people whose organizations that everybody thinks is a dog, like people who you don't like. We're not going to rep you if you have a lot of money but you're not a great guy. And we're not going to rep you if we ultimately don't believe what you're doing is productive or meaningful. Is that what you were asking? Sir, who's not in the class?
Any questions or comments?
If someone were to need a publicist, is that kind of what your firm does?
That's a really good question. If someone were in crisis, they had a scandal that was public and it was unexpected, and they were like,
Asking for a friend.
yeah, exactly. Let's just say. So yes, we would do short-term crisis intervention. And then the other thing we do for individuals is if there's someone who has some community stature or they're just moving into a community, we can help people get on boards, we can help them network, we can help them sit on policy organizations they care about, we can help introduce them to influencers that they think are important for their community. What we wouldn't do is a celebrity who needs public relations, or a high-profile individual who wants us to generate public relations or social media hits or sort of the celebrity side of public relations we don't do. We do the crisis side of a high-profile person who was caught in a dilemma or a scandal or a miscommunication. And we do the part that you're an influencer in the community, but you want to get to know other people or you want to sit on a board. That happens a lot. I'll give you an easy example of a company who does it really well. Goldman Sachs, when they moved into Utah, they have a process for their top-level CEOs who are now wanting to be a part of the community, and they want to really dig a little deeper. They use firms like ours to help them just integrate a little better, like not a direct outcome, but just to integrate because they're like, we are committed now to the communities in which we live. So we do have CEOs who move in and want to integrate into the communities that they live in. Yeah, it's again, an example of something we learned along the way.
Yeah, it wouldn't have occurred to me.
No. And you hear it and you're like, okay, makes some sense, but I don't think about it. Didn't apply to me personally, so yeah.
So can you tell us about one of, either I guess your best or your worst projects that you worked on with the community and how that went? One of your favorite clients that you worked with or issue that you pursued?
Gosh, you'd think I'd be more prepared for this, huh? I'm like, favorite client.
The
Exactly. You're right. We've had a lot of meaningful, I'm really proud of sort of some of the entitlement work we've done. So we have helped Museum of Natural History build their new building that I feel like is generational. We have helped Public Safety build their buildings and start community foundations that help police officers. So this was started 7, 8, 9 years ago, helping police officers integrate into their community a little better, which is something we're woefully lacking still now. We have most of the light rail that you see. We were a part of the team that developed the plans and delivered light rail. We do a lot of arts projects, so a lot of the facilities that you see for some of the cultural events, we have helped establish the bonds or developed the ongoing means to support those. Some of it's really boring and I'm proud of is that I'm sure a hot issue everyone was pretty excited about was when they restructured Salt Lake County government. I know you're saying, how did you miss that? So it's super boring, but it's really cool. I mean, it is really cool because you can look around and say, but for our work. Where we're really lucky is I believe we can confidently say we were a really important part of that linked chain. And I think if Exoro wasn't there, the chain would miss a link. That is not to say we did it alone, but we are lucky to be a part of it. I'll tell you my most interesting client, and I will tell you something that I find super interesting. I have to preface it by saying I swear to you it's interesting. Water policy. I know. Chris is going to laugh at me. You guys are too young, but I am so Cliff Clavin. I am like, well, a little known fact about water. So, the Western United States, water is everything. Go into water. I don't care. Do something productive with water policy. It has everything. It has money. It's overtraded. It has politics. It has intrigues. It has these constituencies. It has orders and rights. It has laws that contradict and make no sense. We've oversold our water. Half of the Wasatch Front has secondary water rights that is super stressful to find out about. It's so awesome. So we spend a lot of time on water policy. And the state of Utah is the second most arid state in the United States, but we have, bless our pioneer settlers, we have some really nice infrastructure, and we've stayed in front of that. Infrastructure is a super interesting policy. We have several failures that I'm going to, of course, spin because that's what I do. Several failures in which I feel really good about because we have fired a few clients. And I feel great about the fact that at the end of the day, we will fire a client. And one of the reasons is that if they're not operating forthright with us, we're a lot in the public eye. So if we can't trust each other, it makes us worse for them, and it makes it worse for us. And then everyone, here's the pro-con, everyone we work with is like super smart, super opinionated, super bullheaded, super visionary. So on any given day, they're like the worst person in the whole world, and then the next day, they're like the best person in the whole world. So there's quite a bit of debriefing about our client on any given day. So I feel lucky to have that client basis. But the work we love is the underlying policy stuff that I feel like I could drive my kids around and say, yeah, we helped make that happen.